Russia has attacked Ukraine with 495 missiles and drones altogether. One of the most devastating attacks so far, in my opinion. What is happening? Well, it's a war of attrition. Let's just make an observation. They launched 495 rockets, missiles, and drones. Caused damage, but it did not cause Ukraine to collapse. So let's flip it. If Ukraine had done something similar to Russia, the West would be saying, "Oh man, Russia is on its last legs. They're going to collapse any minute now." It illustrates that Russia is in a steady campaign of attrition, destroying the ability of power systems to operate in cities. This is where the narrative completely breaks down. If Ukraine launched 495 missiles into Russia, Western media would declare Moscow finished by morning. Headlines would scream collapse. Analysts would talk about regime failure. But when Russia does it, suddenly the standard changes. Now it's not decisive enough. That tells you this isn't analysis. It's expectation management. The Russian strategy, frankly, is to compel citizens to get out of these cities so they can attack more freely. I've heard from a couple of Russian soldiers who felt that in the past their hands were tied by orders from the top to limit damage in civilian areas. They weren't saying they wanted to kill civilians. They were pointing out that the rules of engagement limited them. These 490 drones, missiles, and rockets are actually like half of what Russia was doing a month ago. They have the ability to sustain this kind of operation, and Ukraine doesn't have any air defense system left to counter it. What's being described isn't panic or loss of control. It's constraint being removed. Russian forces were operating under strict rules that limited damage in cities. Those limits now appear to be easing, and the key detail is scale. This level of strikes is lower than before. That suggests capacity and sustainability, not desperation. One thing I've said repeatedly is that this is all about the money. BlackRock made a huge bet that it would reap enormous profits from Ukraine. You would think someone like Larry Fink would have done solid intelligence work and planning. Instead, they bought into misleading narratives. This isn't the first time a billionaire on Wall Street has made a bad call. We saw it with Bill Ackman and Herbalife. In this case, Larry Fink failed to recognize how powerful the Russian army was and assumed Ukraine would win. This wasn't strategy. It was a financial bet. Big money assumed the narrative was true and skipped the hard intelligence. When profit leads and reality follows, the outcome is usually the same. Russia isn't going to withdraw unless Ukraine withdraws from Zaporizhia and Donetsk. Ukraine has insisted it won't. So Russia will keep pressing forward. They're on the threshold of cutting across Zaporizhia rapidly in the coming weeks. Ukraine is a dying nation pretending it's still alive. What's being laid out isn't ideology. It's leverage. Russia doesn't need to talk about withdrawal because it doesn't need to. Ukraine can insist, but Russia can advance. When one side can move forward and the other can only insist, the outcome stops being political and becomes structural. There is no unified European point of view. There's a split. Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia want no part of a war with Russia and want normalized relations. The UK, France, and Germany are the biggest agitators, along with EU leadership. They talk big, but they have no military power of consequence. They provoke without the capacity to back it up. Russia's leadership has lost patience with Europe. They see them as more of a nuisance than a real military threat. Europe is committing economic suicide. Instead of importing cheap Russian oil and gas, they're choosing alternatives that raise prices. That means less growth and more inflation. Russia simply sells. Elsewhere, the cost stays in Europe. This is the core contradiction. Europe cuts itself off to punish Russia, but Russia adapts. Europe pays the price. This hostility toward Russia goes back centuries. After repeated rejection, Russia pivoted east toward China and India. That shift wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. There is no rational thought in European foreign policy. It is driven by emotion and resentment. Germany is suffering more than any other country. Major industries are closing or leaving. Welfare systems mask the pain short term, but debt is rising rapidly. History shows where this path leads. Deindustrialization, debt, and decline. Now Europe talks about Ukraine joining the EU by 2027. But the EU isn't prepared for that. Ukraine has a dysfunctional economy, a collapsing population, and massive war damage. Its population has dropped from over 40 million to under 20 million. That's not sustainable. Bringing Ukraine into the EU isn't expansion. It's absorbing liability. Russia may even say, "Go ahead, take it." As Russia advances, it controls more of Ukraine's resources. The longer the war continues, the less Ukraine there is left to integrate.